Thank you, Professor Shivakumar, for that very generous introduction. In fact, it shows that I'm not a guest speaker. I've been here almost for a year, and I've enjoyed every moment of my association with the Vice Chancellor, whom I knew before, and the members of the faculty. But this is a singular honor that you have asked me to speak today. And in fact, the Chancellor told me that this is a rather interesting subject. In fact, this idea arose from a short article I wrote in the Hindu a few months ago, when the G20 fever was catching up in India. And the title given by the Hindu was, G20 could be an alternative to the Security Council. That was rather shocking for almost everybody in the world. How could you be an alternative to the Security Council? But that came out of my despair, in fact, because 20 years at the United Nations, I've been trying to reform, not only me, but everybody else, has been trying to reform the United Nations, and particularly the Security Council. But then, at the end of it all, we have come to the conclusion that such a reform is not possible. For various reasons, I'll outline them as we go along. So then where do we go? Because the only universal organization which has the responsibility of international peace and security, if it cannot grow with the times, it can even become redundant. But a way has to be found, and the way cannot be found within the terms of the UN Charter. Simply because even to change a word in the UN Charter, you need 2/3 majority of the General Assembly, which is about 135 members, and 5 permanent members of the Security Council. This is something which is almost unattainable. And therefore, if you read the UN Charter today, you will find some strange things in it which have not been changed. For instance, you want to know who are the permanent members of the Security Council. And if you read the UN Charter, it will say Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It is still there. There is no such country in the world. But how come the Charter has not been changed? Because nobody wants to try it. I remember that night when the Soviet flag was taken down and Russian flag was put up. None of us knew. We were in New York. When we went there in the morning, you saw a new flag. Because nobody wants to touch the issue of who is the successor state to the Soviet Union. So the 5 permanent members decided to make a compromise and said, we'll just allow them, but no change in the Charter. Even more strange thing, in the Charter there is a reference to enemy states. It says specifically, though they have not mercifully not mentioned the names, that would be shocking. It says nothing in this Charter will give any security to the enemy states, full stop. So who are the enemy states? It is still there. And you'll be astonished to know they are Germany, Japan, Italy, some of the major pillars of the United Nations. So this is not a prejudice against any of them, but that explains why nothing can be obtained, no change can be made in the Security Council unless these 2 conditions are met. And today there are as many proposals as there are members, 193 proposals for reform. But there are none of them which will actually be getting the support of 2/3 majority of the General Assembly and 5 permanent member support. Of course, it did happen once in our own lifetime, when the United Nations launched a war against Iraq. That was perhaps the only occasion in recent times that the 5 permanent members got together and fought a war against Iraq. But the second Iraq war was not a United Nations war, because by then the permanent members of the Security Council had agreed to disagree. So in a situation like that, where we have tried very hard to make the Security Council of today representative of the world today rather than of the world of 1945, which is what the Charter is all about. How do we get that? How do we do that is the question. And we have just gone through an anniversary which none of us wanted. Just 3 days ago, there was an anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. There are some expectations when you talk about anniversaries, calendars, New Year's, etc. So there was hope against hope that first of all this anniversary will not arise, that the world would have changed, there would have been a solution to the war. But it's exactly opposite that happened. On the 20th, President Biden was in Ukraine, not to celebrate the anniversary, but to make matters worse. For a president to visit a war zone which is not controlled by the United States Armed Forces is the first in history. It was a major risk he took. But the point he made was not that we are going to end the war, but that the United States and NATO were going to scale up the war, support Zelensky, give him what he wants, and to make him win. This itself is a failure of diplomacy. Because whenever there is war, war is called diplomacy by any means. So wherever there is a war, it certainly is a failure of my profession. Because diplomacy is supposed to prevent war through various means. And so it is once again shown that if a permanent member of the Security Council wages a war, there is nothing that the United Nations can do. And at the time of the formulation of the UN Charter, an attempt was made to exclude the permanent members from using their veto when they themselves are engaged in a war, which was very logical. But naturally, the permanent members would not agree to that. So there cannot be a greater matter of regret than the 5 permanent members, when the 5 permanent members who are entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring peace and security in the world, not only wages a war, but also continues to veto every resolution that comes into the Security Council. So having gone through this whole exercise of reform from 1979 onwards, that was my first year in the United Nations as a young diplomat. When India presented a resolution to the General Assembly on behalf of the non-aligned movement to increase the non-permanent membership of the Security Council by 5. The first logic was, when there were 85 members in the General Assembly, 15 members were fixed as the membership of the Security Council. And now that it is 192, I think it was at that time, or 190, proportionately it should increase. 15 members of the Security Council cannot really reflect a world where there are 192 members. And Ambassador Mishra, who was later as National Security Advisor, presented this resolution in the General Assembly. And there was an uproar among the permanent members. Within a few days, the 5 permanent members made a beeline to Delhi to meet Mrs. Gandhi to protest against this kind of revolution that we were seeking, as it were. Everybody was very surprised because we thought it would be a normal procedure. And since then, whatever they may be saying elsewhere, the 5 permanent members have very steadfastly stood against any expansion of the Security Council, whether it is permanent or non-permanent. Everything else is theater. We should not believe any of those statements when they say, for example, the Chinese would say, we want India to play a leading role in the United Nations. That's all. President Obama came to India and said in Bombay that in the future, he said, I would like to see a reformed Security Council, including India as a permanent member of the United Nations. And people jumped with joy, saying, what, here is the support. What does it say? In future, when there is a Security Council reformed, I would like to see. And as soon as he went back, when he saw all the joy expressed in India, he sent a secret memo to the Secretary of State saying, please don't take any note of what I said in Bombay. Please prevent this, because this came out in WikiLeaks. Because the policies of these 5 countries who want to become permanent members are against the wishes, they are against the wishes of the vital issues that we handle in the United Nations. Even that did not prevent us from celebrating. We did celebrate. So occasionally we get such noises. But the fact of the matter is, we are not going to be a permanent member under the provisions of the Charter, because we will never get the kind of votes that we need. So let's not blame the permanent members, because in the General Assembly itself, there is very active opposition, which we don't hear about, against any expansion of the permanent membership of the Security Council. If anything, they would like to throw these 5 out. That is the preference of the General Assembly. But then our leadership, for political reasons, we keep saying it will come tomorrow, day after tomorrow. Many people are surprised when I say we will never make it. For pure mathematical reasons. So where do we go from here? This is what we have all been wondering, and that is what prompted me to write this article. Of course, the reaction was shock, surprise, and calling me a pipe dreamer. Everything happened. But some people also said maybe we must think out of the box and pursue a path in that direction. And that is when, fortunately, the G20 became active. Of course, you know the 4 major game-changing events of the 21st century. So it's not only in the Ukraine war that the Security Council or the United Nations has failed to act. So the first is 9/11. What did 9/11 do to the world? We seem to have forgotten it. It completely destroyed the theories of balance of power. It completely destroyed the invincibility of nuclear powers. It completely destroyed any sense of security that any person will have because of his capacity to fight. United States, which has the capacity to destroy the world 55 times over. I don't know why do they want it for 55 times. Was defeated by 10 people who had no weapons on them. The only weapons those 10 people had were knives and forks picked up from the planes. So think about it. Why do you need nuclear weapons? What kind of deterrent are you creating? So United States was defeated despite all the strength and all the capacity that they had. And that has changed the world. And the US has not recovered from it, nor have we. Every time you go to the airport, you should remember 9/11. It was a different world before that. Then came the economic meltdown of the world in 2006, 2007, Another earth-shaking event. India was fairly immune to it because of our own systems. But virtually every American lost 40% of his assets in one shot when those banks collapsed. What did it teach to the world? That the G7 countries, which are the most industrialized countries, who were supposed to deal with, like the Security Council deal with security, G7 had taken on themselves the responsibility to look after the economy of the world. And they realized that it was not possible. And that is how G20 was born. Of course, G20 was there in some form in 1999 because G7 countries felt that the more industrialized developing countries should also be brought into the structure of the economy. And it was finally Dr. Manmohan Singh who became the main actor in that particular crisis. And that is why Barack Obama keeps him my guru, calls him my guru, he says, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Again, a sudden big change in the world. That G7 is incapable of dealing with economic issues of the kind that come up today. Of course, G20 remained as a body which deals with economic and commercial issues. But you cannot separate the two. So increasingly, G20 started making declarations on political and other matters. But still it was lying very low. Nobody thought of G20 as a major force. Then look at the pandemic, the third biggest crisis we face in what I call the dreadful decades of the 21st century. President Barack Obama once said that no pandemic will come to the United States. We are immune to most of these diseases. But we have to be careful because these diseases might erupt in the developing world, in Asia, Africa, Latin America. And the fact that a plane could arrive in Washington within 10 hours from many of these places, we should be careful. But what happened? We were afraid of the planes coming from New York rather than the planes coming from Nairobi. Because the biggest losses took place in the most advanced country in the world. Again, what was the problem? Lack of international cooperation and the authority of the permanent five. Before, when we had these pestilences like Ebola, the Security Council dealt with it because these diseases are considered to be existential threat to humanity. But here we have the biggest existential threat to humanity, and the Security Council could not even meet in 2020. Why? Veto of China. At that time, China was being accused of having created the virus, or at least having kept it a secret for a long time. And that very month, by rotation, China happened to be the president of the Security Council. So they wouldn't meet. China said, leave it to the WHO. WHO is simply a health organization. It doesn't deal with international peace and security. And therefore, countries went helter-skelter. There was no coordination among any of the groupings. Prime Minister Modi tried to get SAARC to get together. That he was the first one to talk about international cooperation. And the health minister of Pakistan came, and believe it or not, he talked about Jammu and Kashmir. There is a joke about each country's preoccupation, So somebody was asked to, diplomats were asked to write on the elephant. So the UK wrote about the elegance of the elephant. The French wrote about the love life of the elephant. Indians wrote about the majesty of the elephant. And Pakistan talked about elephant and Jammu and Kashmir. That's what they did. Here is a pandemic. And the Prime Minister of India, who had, of course, disowned SARC earlier, thought that this was an important matter to get the SARC back into action. G20 met, nothing happened. So the 2 years that we failed to deal with the situation effectively was also because of a permanent member of the Security Council. So look at all these 4 crises we passed through. Because human beings have the ability to forget one and take the other one. You know, the bigger crisis comes, we forget the older one. Now 9/11, nobody thinks about it seriously. But these are all with us to stay. And so we need an alternative. We need an alternative system. Of course, nobody can dismantle the United Nations, because unlike the League of Nations, which is simply a peacemaking organization, United Nations is a multifaceted organization. It was, of course, set up to rid the generations, future generations, of the scourge of war. This is what the Charter says. That was the objective. But do you know that there have been 800 wars since the UN was set up? So hasn't it failed? It has. But that doesn't mean that UN will fail, because UN has many other responsibilities. They have many achievements. Decolonization, for instance. There are only 52 countries in the UN when UN was set up. And today there are 193 countries. Where were those countries? Who liberated them? Who brought them to the center of the world? United Nations, certainly. And the 70th birthday of the UN, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was asked, what is the greatest accomplishment of the United Nations so far? Everybody expected he would say the usual thing, we prevented a third world war. Nobody knows, did they prevent a third world war? But they were there and the world war did not come, so they take the credit. But Ban Ki-moon was cleverer than that. He didn't say that. He said, we vaccinated the world's children against infectious diseases, not viruses. And by that single activity by UNICEF has saved more millions of lives than lost in the World War II. So how can you forget an organization like that? Look at the Atomic Energy Agency where I worked for 4 years. President Kennedy had predicted that by 2000 there will be 35 nuclear weapon states in this world. There were enough candidates, yes. But the IAEA prevented any addition to the 8 we already have. 5 officially declared, and India, Israel, and Pakistan, 3 not officially declared. So from 35 to 8 is a good change. And that the IAEA has accomplished it. So similarly, if you look at any of these specialized agencies, they are become much more relevant than the main United Nations, because for the developing world, these are the agencies or the international cooperation which have helped us. So you cannot do that. But what is it that we can do? What we can do is to find an unofficial, real, not real, representative body which can replace the Security Council on situations like the one that we have. It is a pipe dream. But what are the advantages that G20 has, if you look at that? Its composition is ideal, not like the composition of the present Security Council, because only 5 are permanent members. We don't know who will come every 2 years in the 10. There is no clarity about what kind of Security Council will have every 2 years. Permanent members, but every 2 years you have new members. So that composition is out of control. Anytime it can change. But G20 does not have that. they have been formed, G20 has been formed as a permanent body. And who are all in it? The 5 permanent members are already there, without a veto. Don't forget that. 5 candidates are there. India, Germany, Japan, Brazil, South Africa are already there. Major developed countries like Australia and Canada are there in addition to G7. Italy is there. Maybe you could have one more country from the Arab world, because there's only Saudi Arabia. Maybe Egypt should have been there. From Africa, South Africa is there. So if you look at the credentials of these 20 countries, you will find that it is much more balanced and much more reflecting the reality of the world today than the Security Council. So that gives you an idea that it is possible to work this and perhaps go around the requirement of the Security Council having to have a particular decision-making process. And look at the structure of G20. It is a much more inclusive structure than the Security Council, because they have 2 tracks. One is called the financial track, and the other one is called the Sherpa track. Of course, just before I started thinking about this talk, I had thought that these tracks will work, but last night, you may have read in the morning today, that the finance track could not approve a statement, because they are not supposed to deal with Ukraine or anything like that. But both the Russia and China objected to a paragraph which was reproduced from the Bali Declaration, which was adopted just a few months ago. They said, sorry, the world has changed. So we could not have an agreement from G20 on the matter of Ukraine conflict. And finally what happened was our finance minister made a statement summarizing what she thought was what happened. And she mentioned in a statement that there is considerable support for the war to end. But a joint statement was not possible. So those who want to oppose the G20 idea will say, see, you already seen it. And that's not a surprise. But the Bali Declaration and the role played by India in drafting that declaration, and by coincidence, India becoming the chairman of G20, gave me some hope that there could be a thought in that way. Of course, you must have noticed what India is doing. We are holding meetings, hundreds of meetings in different parts of the country. Nobody else has done it. We have taken this whole concept of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, one earth, one land, one idea. So all that we are doing. But we are also not talking about the war. That's also very significant. Because nobody thinks that by December this year, we might be able to end the war. But it ought to be the main consideration at G20 will be, I am predicting, on this issue. And moves are already taking place. One of the significant changes which we have perceived in the last few days is Chinese activity in this. Because China is considerably embarrassed that their position of support to Russia, because they are in company with India in this, that's another issue. And so they are making some noises to move slightly away from the Russian position and move towards a peaceful resolution. And Xi Jinping is supposed to visit Moscow. The foreign minister was already there. So all these are moving in a direction of G20 somehow performing the responsibility of the Security Council without claiming any authority or getting any authority from anybody. So this is the whole idea of thinking in terms of a solution for which we have no way in any other way. In the last 40 years, there have been many proposals, including proposals from the Secretary General Kofi Annan. Even those were not accepted by anyone. Everybody makes a counter proposal. And as I said, more than anything else, the opposition comes from, not from the permanent members alone, but also from the larger membership. It is a secret, but I still can tell you that when we were there, people used to say, no, India get a majority, why not? We are a great country, peaceful nation. Who is going to say no to India? And they all said these polite things. And so we did something. We approached every ambassador secretly, maybe after giving them a little tandoori chicken. We asked, will you vote for us? If there is a vote, do you know how many we got? 70 votes. You need another 70. Where do we get from? Fortunately, not only Bhutan and Mauritius voted for us. There were others also. I said Bhutan and Mauritius because we had this hilarious occasion when Mr. Jaswant Singh was holding conversations with Strobe Talbot in different parts of the world, which ended in the nuclear deal, because the nuclear deal was signed by the Congress government, but it was actually negotiated by the BJP foreign minister. And they were discussing very many things. Of course, both of them were somewhat philosophic, so they would say things which some of us who listened did not understand what they were talking about. Because Mr. Jaswant Singh started by the thesis that in Rajasthan we say, if you don't want to go to a village, don't look for the path towards it. You should ask where is this village only if you want to go there, right? So he said India and America are talking for about a village which we never want to reach. Complete disarmament, complete peace in the world. And such conversation, in the midst of it all, one day, Mr. Talbot asked Mr. Jaswant Singh, we were having coffee, and he said, Mr. Minister, suppose there is a conflict in which India gets involved. Which country in the world will come to your support automatically? So Jaswant Singh gulped his coffee very fast because he wanted time. But Talbot did not give him time. He said, don't tell me Bhutan and Mauritius, he said. So, being a powerful country, being a strong country, being a populous country, etc., we cannot expect to be popular. We all hear these days about India's rising reputation, etc., etc. They all grudgingly, many of them, support it. But when it comes to a decision that would give us a different stature in the world, BBC will come up with a program. The Freedom House will come up with a downgradation of the Indian democracy. Why all this suddenly? Why did they find out all this? Because the fact that India is rising is a concept that we all appreciate, admire, and anticipate. But we cannot expect that because everyone wants to remain on top of the world. But the peculiar situation today, as I'm going to conclude, is that we are in the middle of two world orders. The post-Second World War world order was created by the winners of the war. How long can they hold on to that world order? And therefore, they themselves denounced it. If the United Nations is weaker today, it is because of the United States. First, they started not paying their dues to the UN, saying that we have no money. And finally, Donald Trump went up to the United Nations General Assembly and said, we don't need you, you don't need us. These are his words. America first, and I'll take care of America. And all of you, please take care of your countries. And this kind of club activities, we are not interested. So if United States can disown the United Nations, which are supposed to be the fulcrum of the world, which means that old world order has gone. And is there a new world order yet? We don't know. We used to dream about a multipolar world. We were in a bipolar world, and we moved to a unipolar world. Still, I think it is a unipolar world because United States is still the most preeminent country, but challenged by others. But our anticipation was that there would be a new Cold War between the United States and China, and India could lead a pole which is of the middle powers, democratic countries, including Russia perhaps, because Russia would also become democratic. Russia, Germany, UK, France. So this could rally around, these countries could come around maybe India's leadership or some other leadership. So there would be 6 poles in the world: United States, Russia, European Union, Japan, China, and India. This was the dream that all of us had. But this has been completely smashed by the fact that China and Russia signed an agreement just before the war. There is no such military agreement ever in the world because it has no conditionalities, no holds barred. It's a total commitment to each other. And that deprived us of a friend that we had. We are still holding on to that friend. When the China war took place, Soviet Union did not support us. Soviet Union said one is a friend and the other is a brother, so we keep quiet. And we know who is the friend and who is the brother. In 2020, they facilitated some kind of meetings between India and China in Moscow. But beyond that, we did not get any support. But the signature on the treaty between China and Russia has changed the world for us. Most of us don't realize it, but that is the truth. Because if Ukraine is defeated today, next day it will be Taiwan. And if Taiwan is attacked and Russia and China join together to support to support China's occupation of Taiwan, then what happens? So even this dream that we had of a new structure, a new architecture of the world, has collapsed. And the strange thing is, you think about every country in the world. Is there anybody who is happy with his present situation? Just think about any big country. Are they likely to be happy with what is happening around us? Nobody is. US is not happy, Russia is not happy, China is not happy, we are not happy. So, we all have become, in the words of Shiv Shankar Menon, who wrote in the Foreign Policy, we have all become revisionists. It's a very interesting idea. That nobody wants to protect your situation. We all want to change. And the change is not coming. And we do not know what that change will be. So it is in this context that we need to think out of the box. It may be a pipe dream, maybe it will never happen. But something has to happen to this world. We cannot continue like this in a complete disorder. You cannot deal with a pandemic, you cannot deal with terrorism, you cannot deal with the economic situation, you cannot deal with a war. Then how does humanity survive? So that is the context in which I was saying that against this backdrop of reformed multilateralism that we have been promoting, you need to think in terms of a collective group of nations who are not constrained by the UN Charter to think in terms of solutions which can eventually be sold to the United Nations and the Security Council. They are not going to go away, but there could be a second track to deal with international situations, and that I don't think is possible without our looking at other alternatives. Other alternatives have been considered, G7, regional groups, many things. But I think G20 offers that structure, the composition, and the capability. After the Bali Declaration, we know that G20 is capable of coming to some consensus. So that exactly is the point I'm trying to make. But I cannot guarantee that this will happen. It may not happen at all. But a thinking in a process of an alternative or supportive body which does not have veto, and incidentally, secretly, which does not have Pakistan in it, good for us. You're not laughing. You're pretending to not know. No. Thank God they will not bring Jammu and Kashmir to G20. Isn't it a beautiful thing? Because most of the time we are dealing with Pakistan. Indian foreign policy, 80% Pakistan, 20%, 10% China, and 10% rest of the world. I know it from my own experience. So a body without Pakistan is something to be preserved. All right? So thank you. Thank you very much. So if we have time for questions, I shall be happy to. I have time. Yes, please.
So wonderful, it was very revealing. I had a couple of questions. One is a piece of information. So amongst many accomplishments of United Nations, one that comes to my mind because of my small association is also the role that UNICEF played in iodizing salt across many developed countries, which has prevented thyroid in many children. And so I thought I'll mention that. But my question is really, we now have two neighbors who are in tremendous state of economic and political destabilization. And both of those states having deep ties with China. So I just wanted you to kind of think about or kind of share with us, what do you think the perspective of how this is going to turn out? Is Indian policy kind of making enough decisions and initiatives to capitalize on this situation to our own advantage?
But to balance what you said, I must say that China and Pakistan are Sri Lanka and Pakistan are not new problem countries. In early 80s, an IMF delegation which went to Sri Lanka to study their economy said that Sri Lanka is enjoying the fruits of a tree which they have not even planted. This was their observation. So over the years, Sri Lanka has been misusing their credit facilities. They have been banking on tourism and tea, which were not sustainable during the pandemic, and the corruption, nepotism, everything else in the world. So we like to say China ruined Sri Lanka. But that's not entirely true, because Sri Lanka's debt to China is only in terms of the port, 9 billion, 12 billion. That is not a big amount to pay. So Sri Lanka was not a prospectively, because it was a very popular country. All of us went to buy cameras in Colombo, you remember. But so what I'm saying is it is not a new, unexpected development. Same thing with Pakistan. Pakistan has been called a failing state or failed state many times. It was propped up by the Americans. Now it is propped up by the Chinese. So these are not classical cases, that's what I mean. In terms of solution for our neighborhood and our relationship with these countries, we should think more in terms of, say, Bangladesh or Nepal, because we have problems with them also. But these failing states will have to be supported by some other means like the IMF or the World Bank. India cannot support it. And the one good thing is Chinese now don't look at Sri Lanka. They never offered anything when all this happened. And we were the ones who gave them $4 billion. So they will let it go. They will not cultivate a failed state. So the responsibility may come to us and they may be more friendly to us at that time. Pakistan, of course, our Prime Minister has taken a position which is very tough, because he tried by sending saris to Nawaz Sharif's mother, attending Nawaz Sharif's grandson's wedding. These are the kind of things he did in the first few months, because he was on a peace offensive. Now look at him. Now he doesn't want to even give humanitarian assistance to Pakistan during the floods. We gave to Syria, we gave to anybody else, but he didn't give a single penny to Pakistan. He did not even offer. And he privately said, if I offer, they will refuse, so I don't want to offer. So his position of not dealing with Pakistan is final. And that was the policy earlier also. But he is decisively doing it. Not that we don't have a second-track diplomacy and all that. That keeps on going because war has to be prevented. But other than that, we are taking effort. So what I mean to say is these are sui generis. These are not cases where we have to worry when we talk of an overall settlement of issues. That's what I mean. Yeah. Mike.
Thank you, sir, for that fascinating lecture. And I'm Shaheli Chattaraj, Assistant Professor, China Studies at Somaiya Vidya Vihar University. I did read your article in the Hindu as well, where you have proposed the G20 as an alternate for the Security Council, which was very fascinating to me. So coming to that and drawing a connection, do you think that India will be able to utilize the G20 as a platform to also push through its interests vis-a-vis China? And especially since the border dispute and Galwan, where India clearly made a point that we do not want to not solve the border dispute and just like promote our economy, but at the same time, the border dispute is also a very, very crucial factor coming to India-China relations. Thank you, sir.
Well, we will explore everything to normalize with China, but we also realize that their objective, You know what China's famous statement about India? We want to teach India a lesson. They have never told us what that lesson is, right? They said it in '62, they said it in 2020 also. During the Bhutan border incident also, they said we are teaching India a lesson. What is that lesson? Lesson is that they want to dominate Asia. So '62 came because they thought that India had already overtaken them in that sense. Asia, Africa, Pandit Nehru, and that is what prompted them. But they have taught us several lessons, but we still are very nationalistic and very, aggressive about China, and therefore they'll continue to do that. But one context in which India and China could cooperate today in the G20 is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Don't forget that we voted identically on every resolution in the Security Council and in the General Assembly, including yesterday. Yesterday, the Europeans pushed India and China very hard to support this resolution. Because what resolution says, it doesn't matter, we can support it. It only says cease fire and negotiations. But we abstained. And since I mentioned that Xi Jinping is going to go to Moscow, maybe he'd like to take Mr. Modi along. That will not be a bad idea. So let's not give up hope.
My name is Dr. Ramakrishnan, Deputy Registrar. I want to ask the question, these aids what we are giving and different type of credit line, do we get back those money or it is just one-way traffic? And second thing, especially with Sri Lanka you were telling, why could not we convince Sri Lanka about building a bridge between India and Sri Lanka, which has been a dream project?
Physical bridge?
Physical bridge. Okay. Physical bridge
What,
that is between
Hanuman
Dhanushkoti and Talaimanar. No, not that. The Dhanushkoti Talaimanar which the British conceived, which could open up traffic both to Colombo and Hambantota and Trikonamale.
Yes, if you give them the money.
We will build it.
They had offered Hambantota to us, you remember?
Yes.
At a much less price, and we refused. We said, what is Hambantota to do with us? Yes. Anyway, these are all things one should do for neighbors.
Yeah.
But whether a bridge is the answer, I don't know. Because the bridge might bring refugees, may bring terrorists. You never know. Yeah. So it's good to have some distance.
So, sir, you spoke about disarmament. Do you ever think that non-state actors will play any role?
Where? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. So, sir, you spoke about disarmament. Do you ever think non-state actors will play any role in disarmament? And when I talk about disarmament, I mean giving up nuclear arsenals of countries. Do you ever think non-state actors will play any sort of role in giving up, like making countries to give up their nuclear arsenals? Thank you.
Well, disarmament, the 5 permanent members have never accepted that thesis. Because they made NPT what it is. NPT, as you may know, was an Indian draft. We drafted the NPT and presented it to the UN saying that everybody will give up nuclear weapons. That's how the discussion started. And where did it end in 1970? everybody will give up nuclear weapons except the P5. And that is now written in stone. It cannot change. So disarmament by these powers, like for example, there was a lot of hue and cry about SALT treaty. Everybody said, oh, what is Russia done? Russia has done, withdrawn from the SALT treaty. I was asked on television, what do you think of it? I said, nothing. It has nothing to do with us. There is a deal between the Russians and the Americans to save their cost. So the generals sit together, how many weapons do you have? You can destroy us 30 times. Okay, we'll also restrict it to 30 times. We'll not go to 50 times. This is a drill. It has no meaning in disarmament because that saves the money. So if Russia walks out of SALT treaty, I won't bother about it. But if they don't accept the disarmament, what we want is the world free of nuclear weapons, including ours. We are willing to give up our nuclear weapons anytime the others agree. So that situation has not come about. This non-state actors is an issue which the IAEA is doing a lot. See, IAEA has a program of discovering or finding out or recovering lost nuclear material. So any country or any individual has lost nuclear material, they can report to the IAEA, and the IAEA will recover it. And India is a major partner in that effort. Do you know, we have recovered more nuclear material than ever declared lost. Serious. So there is so much of nuclear material in the hands of terrorists and non-state actors that we cannot contain it by a state action. Nobody will report to the IAEA. And people come to our embassies in different countries secretly and saying, oh, I got this nuclear weapon, will you buy from us? Yes, honestly. And ambassadors write secret letters to the foreign secretary. Here is an offer, shall I? And the immediate instruction will go, don't even touch with the barge pole. And the ambassadors are very upset because they found out this great discovery. It has happened several times, I know. So this is an area which is beyond control. You must have all read that novel of a man sitting on top of the World Trade Center and threatening to bomb the world with a nuclear weapon, which turned out to be a hoax. But that is a reality. It can happen anytime. It can make you give up many things by that threat. So that cannot be covered by any disarmament proposal. Now with ChatGPT, you can make a nuclear weapon in your house. Just as you can write a Shakespearean poem through ChatGPT. I hope you know that. Because we don't need any writers, poets, dramatists, etc. I tried that. I just told ChatGPT I want to write a novel of an Indian and Pakistani diplomats secretly negotiating and getting a solution on the Kashmir problem. I got it 30 pages. Exactly as I imagined. Both of them are having same girlfriends in, different capitals. Everything as I had imagined, they produced. So if you don't know about this, please, students, you don't need to do any homework anymore. And ChatGPT participated in several competitive examinations in the world. And it won each one of them except the UPSC of India. They couldn't beat the UPSC. So I tell my civil service students, I said, you are the...
Good morning, sir. My name is Anirudh.
Yeah.
So my question is, one thing that we have learned from the past is never trust the West because they are very expert in divide and rule kind of strategies.
Never trust who?
Divide and rule, Western countries.
West.
So what is your thinking that G20 is just another strategy by West to divide and rule developing countries? Because as we know that India was one of the leading countries in NAM, and also even after G20 is formed, G7 is not disassembled.
Yeah, it could be, because G7 formed G20. So it could be a trap. But what else do you have? You give me another body we can fiddle around with.
United Nation itself, like the whole United Nation together, rather than G20 alone.
Yeah, that is what we need. You can't do anything without the United Nations.
Yes, sir.
But the idea is for somebody to work on it and produce something which is sellable to the United Nations. That is my initial proposition. You cannot close down the United Nations.
Yes, sir.
And as long as you don't close it down, the permanent members will remain. So, an alternative route, that's all. Yes, Satyendra.
Sir,
Yeah.
here.
Where are you?
Here, in front of you, sir.
Okay. Okay.
My name is Rehan and I'm from the Somaya school and I had a question. So with the G20 gaining such popularity, it is already being eyed as the next Security Council, right? So do you think that countries which are stronger economically, socially, politically, diplomatically or even militarily, can they change the power dynamic in the G20? Like how we have permanent members who have the power of veto in the UN and the Security Council. Not like that, but do you think that they can take much more charge, like India is doing right now? It's holding a G20 summit here and it is at the forefront. So do you think such things can happen in the G20?
Well, it can happen, that's what we hope. But what we seem to forget in our idea of promoting G20 for our own purposes or our own philosophy may not be very acceptable to the whole body. We must remember that it's a multilateral body. In a multilateral body, everybody will try to gain prominence. So when India happens to be a chairman and therefore we are doing this, and that may not last beyond our presidency. Another president may come and change it. That is one danger. But whatever good that can happen and non-controversial, like climate change, why not? Nobody is going to question you if you do that. Terrorism is challenged by everybody. But some of the things that we do in G20, like health, like cultural cooperation, various other things, will pass. So it'll be a mix that we may not get what we want, but certainly people will first of all know about India, because you will be surprised to know how little that the world knows about us. So even taking them through Bangalore and Trivandrum will open their eyes to what India is like. So that benefit we will have. But whether that will make us world leader, Vishwa Guru and all that, I'm not so sure.
May I ask one
Yeah,
question?
please.
I have actually two questions. One on the United Nations. Last year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was there in Mumbai, and I could hear him. He said, the United Nations at many fronts is helpless. And Secretary General, he said, even I can't take decisions, certain things, even being the Secretary General. So is that UN is going to be more like welfare organization rather than taking a decision which is the peace and justice for the world? And second, on the G20, because G20 also getting to 20 nations and probably more will be joining. When you have this large number of groups coming together, taking a decision also become challenging because every state, every nation has their own interest. And same we can see in the United Nations when the number increases and that decision also somewhat affected. So can you reflect on that, these two components? Thank you.
First of all, what the Secretary General said was absolutely right. He is considered the conscience of mankind, but only to bring an issue to the Security Council. His role ends there. Then he only writes reports. So that people don't know. People think that Secretary General can do something, but what he said was right. But Hammarskjöld said what a Secretary General should be doing. You know what he said? He said the United Nations was not created to take us all to heaven. It is designed to prevent us from going to hell. Right? That we have accomplished. We have not gone to hell as yet. So as far as G20 becoming a bigger organization, that we should prevent. As I said, other than one country which is conspicuously omitted is Egypt, because you have only one Arab country. So that may be a case. But if you open up the floodgates, everybody will be on to it. So it will be like the non-aligned movement. To destroy the non-aligned movement, you join them. Everybody is non-aligned, right? So then what happens to the non-aligned movement? That may happen, but that has to be prevented. But mine is all a dream world. I'm not talking about reality in that sense. But I explained why I'm thinking on these lines. So it's not a guarantee of anything. But since we are desperate about this, of the Security Council, let us try something desperately. That's all. Mike, you want?
Morning, sir. My name is Ejaz, sir. I'm heading the Sports Academy in Somaya. My question is that we've been trying our best with different technique to try to resolve issues. And I know sport is one of the way where people are trying to use sport diplomacy to solve issues, controversy between the countries. But somewhere down the line, it is backfiring us. In a special case of India-Pakistan match. So we've been trying to do on a neutral country also, but it does backfire at times because people are getting more angry on the other country. It happens with England and Australia, lots of other sports. So is sports the right channel to do this kind of thing?
Well, you know about ping pong diplomacy of the Chinese. It has been a success. That's how they started off. Deathon with the West. You know, you play a lot of ping pong in the process. So certainly sports is extremely interesting on international relations, but it has its problems, like the India-Pakistan one. And that is a political problem coming into sports, rather than sports affecting diplomatic relations. But so it is a positive thing, but then politics certainly come into it, and people want to take rigid positions. But sports have really opened up international relations a lot.
It did help Qatar. People didn't know that country at all.
Qatar?
Yeah. Hosting a World Cup has changed the whole dynamic. People understood what's going on over there, how they manipulated
Well,
the whole
Asian
system.
Games brought India to the front of the world long ago.
Yes, they did, yeah.
So that's really remarkable. So sports certainly are important, but it can go wrong.
It is. Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you for everything. And just had two questions. The first one was, so in case of a conflict or a strong disagreement, who can India have as an ally? Because Russia is a country that would support China, which would be one of the countries we can have a conflict with. Plus, India hasn't really reciprocated to the West support in the past and on a lot of current issues. So we can't expect much guaranteed support from there. The second slightly different question was, with the emergence of these new energy technologies, the importance of oil and basically Arab natural resources will go down. So what do you see happening in that, and how would that affect the world order?
Okay, the first question, the first lesson I was taught in diplomacy was there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And that is the fundamental thing about diplomacy. So tomorrow's enemy may be today's friend. China is a very good example of that. Hindi, Chini, bye-bye, and where do we land now? So there is no permanency about that. Permanent friendships come on because of the interests, and that's what we do, that's what the others do. Technology is a big question, how technology is going to affect all our lives in so many ways. And that has to be dealt with bilaterally or collectively. Like, for example, the new experimentation going on about nuclear fission. Nuclear fusion rather than nuclear fission. There's a very major undertaking going on in Paris where everybody is cooperating. And if you find a way to have fusion for peaceful purpose of nuclear material, one big issue is resolved. So one technology can transform relationships. That is true. But technology provides more challenges than opportunities. Opportunities, yes, but challenges too. You remember Yuval Harari's famous statement in 2000 in Davos. He said the world will not end in a nuclear holocaust. Not like T.S. Eliot said, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. He said it will not be a bang, he said. And then he made the wrong assessment that nor will it end in a pandemic. This was before COVID-19. But he said world will end up in a disaster because more and more people will become worthless because of technology. This was his prediction. See, now all the poets and novelists have become worthless. If ChatGPT develops, it's amazing. I can say, write a poem for me. Then, this program has all that I have written before, and they use those words. And then you say, I want it in the Shakespearean style. Second, you will get a Shakespearean poem in the same. That's what I'm coming to. Exactly. No, I was talking about the downside of technology. Something like this is a big blessing, but many of us will lose our jobs. You don't know what to do. This is what Yuval Harari said. You cannot turn a truck driver into a computer operator. So if you make truck drivers unnecessary, what will this man, 45-year-old man, do? So he will become worthless. He sits at home and drinks beer. And so you will create a whole humanity of beer drinkers in the process. That's a major danger. Yes?
Good afternoon, sir.
The Vice Chancellor has to take a flight. I don't have to.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Twinkle Rambia, and I have a question for you. I would like to know your take on this question, on the situation that we're having border disputes with China frequently in the past few years, and how are we holding China's neck enough with regards to the sea routes, as we can say that China's most trades do happen on the sea routes. So how are we holding China's neck aggressively, and in what ways?
Well, when the aggression took place in 2020, Prime Minister announced 4 measures to deal with China. Number 1 was, of course, negotiation. Number 2 is strengthening our defense forces. Then economic sanctions against China. What was the 4th? Having strong friends. So these were the 3 measures he outlined. It sounded very logical. But what have we ended up with? We are not even able to ban TikTok. Every morning you have TikTok. They are making $40 billion on TikTok. Couldn't stop it. Because our youngsters cannot do without it. Then pharmacy. We are the pharmacy of the world. But 70% of the pharmaceutical material come from China. So today, the trade is much higher than before 2020. And we are more dependent on China. Then we thought all these Chinese companies, American companies in China will come to India because of the problems in China. But China has turned so much friendly to them that they are making more money there. So all these are unpredictable, what we can do with China. But I don't agree with you that we are creating problems or problems have come our way. This was the McMahon line, which was agreed with Tibet. China was not our neighbor, according to geography. You know that. Suddenly Tibet became Chinese, and so we have a Chinese neighbor. So who could have predicted it? But now what has happened is the whole architecture that we created since 1988, the first Rajiv Gandhi visit to China, we first decided that we will continue to deal with China, trade and other things, regardless of the border issue. So freeze the border issue, keep it aside, and develop relations. That was the first, which we managed to do for a long time. In 1993, Narasimha Rao went to China and went one step further. They agreed that neither side shall unilaterally try to change the border, change the LOC, LAC it is, line of actual control. And there will be the words peace and tranquility on the border. These were agreements signed by the 2 countries. But what have they done now? They have destroyed each one of these steps that we had taken. Now there is no LAC even, there is no line of actual control. Whatever they control is actual control. There is no line on the ground. LOC we have a line on the ground, but LAC we don't have that. So, and that gives China an advantage to invade us at will, because there is no basic structure. This is what Mr. Jaishankar keeps saying, that they have destroyed the fundamentals of our relationship. And now you have to start with Panchashil, which they have violated, and come to each of those again. And that's why China is a hard nut to crack.
There is one more question. As you talked about TikTok, so I also would like to know how is setting up a narrative is important. Like they do have influence by controlling the information over the nation, and how important is it for India to work on setting up a narrative? Like I guess they did use camera facility while they had a border dispute with China recently. So how setting up a narrative is important for India?
You mean preventive action?
No, like the situation goes on and there are two stories, as people say, but there is only one truth. So how is India helping itself in setting up a narrative in front of the world as against of China's narrative?
Well, we are building that all the time. What else are we doing all the time? We claim to be an older civilization. We talk about our, history. All that we do. They also, of course, open Confucius centers everywhere in the world. We also open Confucius centers here. So that's a continuing battle to, establish our predominance over the others. That game is going on all the time. But that's going beyond, because of the technology, this is all. See, they were talking about this balloon being burst. So I wrote in my article, why do you need balloons? From a satellite, you can read the amount of sugar in a Coca-Cola can, right? So why balloons? It doesn't serve any purpose. But maybe there is a purpose which is different. And the most famous story about, satellites is what happened to us in 1998. Do you know the story? What happened was the American ambassador went to Mr. Narasimha Rao and said, I know that you are about to test nuclear weapons. And Mr. Narasimha Rao said, I don't know. How do you know? We are not testing or anything. Then he pulled out this picture from his pocket and showed it to him, a satellite picture of showing Abdul Kalam, the other nuclear scientists, all walking around in Pokhran. And he gave it to Narasimha Rao. He said, can I keep it? And the ambassador foolishly left it. Okay. So we are able to test secretly because of that picture. Because he asked the scientists to find out the time when this particular satellite goes over India. And that time, Abdul Kalam and others went underground. So it was peaceful. After the satellite left, they came up and started doing. And the Americans regretted it. That ambassador should have been shot, they said. Because why did he give this picture to the Prime Minister of India? So technology can be beaten in so many ways.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir.
Oh, okay.
Sir.
This side? All right. Okay.
Sir, I had two questions. Number one, what was your reaction when the Soviet Union flag was fallen down on 23rd December 1991? And second, in future, if there is war between India and China, do you think that the West or USA will help India to fight against China?
To do what? To put us in the Security Council or what?
No. For to defeat China in war.
I didn't understand the question, but that already Bhutan and Mauritius.
Yes.
No, Mr. Jaswant Singh did not deny it. When he said Bhutan and Mauritius, he smiled and had some more coffee. No, but China question is different in the sense that we got China back into the UN. You know that, I hope, the Security Council. If we had not supported it, because there is a theory that they offered it to us. I don't know whether it's true or not. Prime Minister Nehru said, no, we don't want the Chinese seat. We will ask for our seat when we are ready. And we have been asking since 79. Nobody is listening. So those positions cannot be changed. Any other? Okay. I think she has had enough, not me. Well, thank you very much. I must say, you're all very valuable audience, but to have the top brass of the university here, Chancellor, Secretary, Vice Chancellor, and others, is a great honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the extremely insightful address. I know you could go on to many more questions. But all good, yeah? Yeah, I think we'll have to have a special session with you so soon. Yeah. Yeah, so you, all those who want to meet up with Sir and discuss, you can always go up and have a chat with him and satiate your endless, satisfaction. Faculty and students, no? I know, sir. Okay, I'm sure you're all aware, sir is a faculty here. So he's available at the KJSM building. He has his cabin. Yeah. Okay. May I now request President Somaiya Vidya Vihar, Shri Samir Somaiya sir, to present a small memento to our honorable speaker. Sir thought I was going to get him to speak. This is a handcrafted shawl.
Our own students work from Kutch.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to invite Lieutenant General Jagbir Singh, sir, to present the concluding remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Sreenivasan, Samir Bhai, VC, deans of faculties and heads of institutions, dear students. Mr. Sreenivasan, in his talk here, so the last 1 hour, given us what his dream about what the Security Council as an alternative to the Security Council could be. You know, this arrangement of multilateral organizations for international peace and security has been ongoing for a century at least. Not that the League of Nations was the first one. The League of Nations came up in 1920 at the end of the First World War. Prior to that also there were certain talks between nations whenever they went to war to come to peace. But the League of Nations was formed by the victor nations, the Allied powers. And therefore, it came after the Treaty of Versailles, wherein the losers were penalized. That wasn't the ideal time or an organization to get the world together. So when it came up in 1920, at that time it's World War I, Italy and Japan were on the side of the Allied powers. And Germany was against, Germany, Austria, etc. And in 31, Italy was the first one to break away. 33, Japan went away. And 36, Germany went away. And thereafter, we all know what happened. The Second World War came about. And in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, we had the United Nations, which was formed. While the League of Nations was still there, but the assets of the League of Nations were handed over to the United Nations in April 1946. And effectively the UN took over the responsibility. But it had a much more varied charter than what the League of Nations had. But again, it was formed by all the victorious powers. So the 5 permanent members here were, we all know, and China, which was also a part of it, assisted in the defeat in the battle war against Japan. And therefore it was the 5th nation came in, but it was the Republic of China. And after 1949, when the communists came in power in China, and the People's Republic of China became a permanent member in 1955. Or 59, I mean, this is one of these years. So there again, at that time there were the powers that had fought together and won a war. And there were countries which were equally powerful. You can imagine Germany and Japan taking on the might of the world. They were strong countries. They were destroyed at a point in time. But they didn't get the same representation that they should have got. And over a period of time, the world order has changed. Like Mr. Sreenivasan said, there's been a global shift of power. It was a bipolar world at the end of the world. At the end of the World War II, there was a NATO pact, and there was a Warsaw Pact countries. The NATO and Warsaw Pact were two blocks, and therefore the Cold War was on. But here again, everybody, there were other countries which were developing, and the veto in the Security Council had been the major stumbling block everywhere. Like he said, there are no permanent friends or no permanent enemies, there are permanent interests, and the interests of the permanent members are always supreme. And therefore, like you also say, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Right? That's the simplest way. If you are my enemy and you have another enemy, then that guy is my friend. And we've also, all countries have made use of the veto has had its advantages and disadvantages and has been used accordingly by a lot of countries. We also took advantage of this, the fact that there was this veto, when we went into a strategic alliance with the USSR, the Soviet Union, before the 71 war. And that's when the Americans moved the 7th Fleet into the Bay of Bengal, the Russians said, we are moving the 6th Fleet in. And that's how we could liberate Bangladesh. Had the 7th Fleet been able to come in without the 6th Fleet showing its eyes, a story we may have had to stop a little before that. So it's been, both ways. And then we had economy taking over as the world was developing. Economic power became the power that was there. So the country which is economically stronger which has the power. In any case, the other powers of state power or diplomacy or armed forces, etc., but economy was a major player. And therein you came in with the G7, which came up in, I think, 1975, made up of the 4 members of the Security Council, 3 as a matter of fact at that time, and Russia joined in much later, became the G8. It was taken out from there in 2014, after it annexed Crimea. And when the G20 came up, because of the economic problems in the 90s, they expanded the G7, G8 into G20, which became more representative of the facts of the world, of the standing of the countries of the world. And you've got 6 countries from Asia, you've got 6 plus 1, the European Union is the 20th, you've got 6 plus 1 from Europe, you've got 3 from North America, you've got 2 from South America, you've got the South Africa and you've got Australia. So it becomes more or less representative of the entire world as it is. And what Mr. Sreenivasan stated, that could be an alternative to the Security Council. However, he said, it's already, the divisions are there. And will always be there. In international, relations, divisions, your own self-interests are more important. And every country looks at its own self-interest. Today, when the Ukraine war is there, if we are abstaining for it, it's a reason for it. Russia has been an all-time friend for us. As a matter of fact, it's been a staunch ally. We still look at it. Well, they are secretive about a number of things. They don't open up fully. But as far as we are concerned, they have come to our aid. And G20 still has the best opportunity to make a success of it. I was told in the Bali declaration in Bali, President Biden wanted that the African Union should also be included in the G20 of 55 states. If those also come in, then it becomes another one of, say, the Union, though it will say African Union, so it's one, but there are 55 states which are part of that. So it becomes even more inclusive because Africa, by and large, has still been left out. You really can't call South Africa as as representing the aspirations of the continent of Africa. So if the G20, which has arrogated a political role to itself, in terms of if he can sort out and settle the Ukraine war, then in times to come, it could become the arbiter of resolving disputes in the world without a veto. But like the Security Council, if it's going to retain its primacy, and the United Nations is going to retain its primacy, then I'm afraid we have to wait and watch as to how. But eventually it's diplomacy. The diplomats know best how to go about it. The generals can fight war. But it's always said it's dangerous to leave diplomacy to generals because they would be happier. And when we talk in terms of, I just want to clarify certain issues about the Chinese front that it came about. You know, the McMahon line was drawn with a nib, which is a thick nib, on a million map. And that one line drawn on it represents 10 kilometers on ground. Okay? So that's left a lot of ambiguity as to which is yours and which is mine. 10 kilometers is a lot of terrain, the way in the mountainous terrain. And today, the Chinese, they've resolved their problems. They have 14 neighbors, they've resolved with 12. They've only left India and Bhutan with an unresolved problem. Why Bhutan? Somebody would wonder as to why Bhutan's been left with an unresolved problem. I'd look at it to say that because the defense of Bhutan is the responsibility of India, it's an indirect method of hitting India by threatening Bhutan. Are we able to take on that responsibility? Or if we are incapable of doing it, to show to the world that India can only talk that they are a major power in being, but they're incapable of looking after people whose defense they've taken on. And I'm happy to state that we stood up at Doklam, and that was something that the Chinese took a lesson from. While they haven't gone back from there, they made there, it's strategically important for us. Similarly, this side, when we've been talking about cooperation with China for a very long time. But the moment we start treating ourselves as equals with China, Chinese don't like it. They are the middle kingdom. They've always believed that they are the fulcrum around which the rest of the world must revolve. And that is why when somebody else comes to threaten their primacy, they don't like it. And this apart, what's happened here is also, it's got two ways to look at it. One is that the Chinese, with their the CPEC that they've got, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which runs across the Karakoram Highway, and we could threaten it. So by coming to wherever they've come, we say it's not their territory, it's ours, or the territory is still disputed. They kind of give depth to their own, to the highway. So talks will continue. And at the end of it, all that has happened is that where we did not have a permanent deployment against China, now we have a permanent deployment both against China and against Pakistan. But I can only say here that we are a rising power. We are strong in every respect. Our diplomacy is strong. And today I think Indian diplomacy is taken on a different shape. It used to be a little subdued at some point in time, but today our diplomacy has become aggressive, and our own self-interests, as we've shown in the Ukraine war, are as important to us for anything else. I'm sure India will play a pivotal role in the G20. Our presidency ends on 30th of November this year. Brazil takes it on thereafter. But whatever the way it gets going now, I'm sure the world would like to see it follow up. Because it helps everyone. If the G20 succeeds, then I think the rest of the world also will be in its favor to see that the G20 really goes up. It's been very, fruitful listening to you, Mr. Sreenivasan, with all your experience of the last, how many decades, I think now, 5 decades, past 4 decades of active diplomacy, and beyond that, after retirement, the next 2 decades that you've had. I also like to add my own 4 decades of active service in the armed forces. And therefore, so it's very interesting when you get going, and I think we can keep going on about these sort of things. But It's always good that you, the youngsters out here, the students, must know as to what is it. You know, it's easier to say, what is G20? How am I interested? It doesn't affect me. But mind you, it will affect each one of us, because the G20 is dealing with climate change, is dealing with sustainable development, and climate change and sustainable development affect the whole world. They affect each and every one of us everywhere. Right? Thank you once again, Mr. Sreenivasan, and thank you all. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite Dr. Satyendra Upadhyay to propose the vote of thanks.
On behalf of Somaya Vidya Vihar University, I am glad to be standing here to express vote of thanks. And a very special thanks to our today's speaker, Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan sir, for enlightening us on G20, a dream security council, that what Abdul Kalam also said, you know, the dream big, and hope this dream is also addressed in the coming years about that. And this become very relevant in the current context. The word is polarization is happening across the world, and also sustainability of the future world. And here I would like to quote quote by Annie McCormick. She says, "Today the real test of power is not capacity to make war, but capacity to prevent it." And probably G20, when you say Dream Council, Security Council, probably it will hope to have the prevention of the war rather than causing about that. So today's talk also reminded us the motto of our founder, K.J. Somaya. It said, knowledge alone liberates. So it's knowledge which will ensure peace, justice, and sustainability in the world. And in today's talk, also Ambassador Sreenivasan mentioned about the various angle, not only the bilateral, also the multilateral, and also the new dimensions coming on the various front about that. So I'm thankful to Dahlia Naiman for gracing your presence, coming over here and be throughout the session with us. So thank you very much. Reva, thank you. And I'm also thank you for all the students, faculty, staff, heads of institution for coming here, attending today's public lecture. And very special thanks to our Chancellor, Sri Samir Somaya Sarji, and Vice Chancellor, Professor V.R. Rajasekharan Pillai sir, and other deans present over here. And this event is collaborative efforts of various institutions on this campus, where the students, faculty, head of institutions are involved in that. And I take this occurrence to thank Dr. Mayur sir, as from CIRAC, as he said, they are taken very nice initiative about that as a part of think tank as well. And also thanks to the all interns at CIRAC who has held in the stage and other logistic. So thank you all. And thanks to the GNL Studio, Awaz company, for the sound system, video stage management. Thank you so much. And also thank you to Ma'am Sunita ma'am for the campus prayer, and Professor Sukumar sir for your welcome address, and Secretary General Jakbir Singh sir, you have given also a thoughts message to the audience, a student, how we should be aware about this kind of general knowledge, which is relevant for us to know. And last but not least, I want to extend my generous thanks to the Somaya Vidya Vihar University IT team, PR team, for the technical and promotion help. And also Dr. Parvati, you have been throughout for this public lecture, so thank you so much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, everybody.